this stage, I have done thousands and thousands of clinical hours with this model, with this, what we call the diamond model. And there are many, many, many amazing transformation stories, people that get their root cause, people that have been, trying to get their root cause for years and years and years and just been managing anxiety. And they are wonderful transformation stories. They're the big stories that we all look for and that I think all of our clients really want to get to. But the one that really stands out really for me is the client that came, it's a few years ago now, but the client that came, and for him, he was a 50-year-old male, against the backdrop of what is normal for 50-year-old males to present themselves with for help. Had quite a prestigious job. It had to upkeep a certain image. All of that material that inevitably holds us back from seeking help. And I think that's what's so amazing about this story is that, there was this gorgeous man, this lovely man who presented himself having suffered with anxiety for his entire life, for his entire youth and right through. And now it was actually getting in the way. Now it was actually getting in the way of his success. It was getting in the way of how he held himself. It was getting in the way. And the panic attacks were becoming so severe that he was actually afraid of his own body. He was afraid of what his body could do. He was afraid of how that looked to other people. And he started to reduce and reduce and reduce his life. He started to reduce his circles. And for somebody in business, that's a very difficult thing to do. And so he came originally, and we started to work very simply. And you'll get to hear this inside the summit. But we started to work very simply on creating tolerance of the body. Now, tolerance is where the first stages of, psychoeducation, and we all know how to use psychoeducation. What really moved the dial for this client was that psychoeducation in context moved the dial further than it had ever done for him. So he had been to other therapists, he'd been for CBT, he'd been for all the usual stuff. And what happened for this client was that when we started to use psychoeducation in context with his symptoms, which is what I teach that inside a thing called maps and patterns, then not only can we understand and for the client to get a bird's eye view of what's happening, but it starts the regulation process. That alone in of itself is not enough to stop the symptoms. That alone in of itself is not enough to de-escalate the client's threat system or de-escalate the client's neuroception. Because for this client, the root cause was the fear of death, and the body was the main concern for the client and for the client's neuroception. So immediately I knew that we had to use in the model that the first thing that we had to do was create tolerance, which was fine and easy done in context. And the second thing that we had to do is that we had to switch off the symptoms. And that for me, I think that's why this story stands out for me from a client's perspective. That for me was amazing. His response whenever we did switch off the symptoms, whenever we stopped the panic, whenever we stopped it at its very basic symptom, and that can be done. And I'm going to show you that and how that happens and how we can do that inside the summit. But when we did that together, and when he applied what he learned in sessions, and when he did that and switched off his symptoms, then sovereignty kicked in, control kicked in. Then the neuroception switched off because it didn't need to be afraid of the body anymore. Then calm restored, and I'll never forget him, ringing me and saying, "What the hell have you done?" To which, of course, my response was, "I've done nothing. You've done all the hard work. I'm only but a murder you." But he was so dumbfounded that after all of this time, that he had control over his body. And that was enough for him. He didn't want to go into his childhood. He didn't want to go back into the depths of the patterns within him, which is also part of this model, but he didn't want that. It's his prerogative. He was so overwhelmed and grateful and delighted and found a new lease of life in the fact that these symptoms had stopped building, that he was able to get back on with his life the way that it had before. And that was quite profound for this client. I mean, some clients will want to do the deep dive, will want to do the root cause, will want to do, go back into their childhood, and that's fine. But for this client, he did what I would call the first two principles of the model, and that was absolutely enough for him, and he absolutely was transformed by it. So that's what I love about the model. I love that we can pick and choose, and the client can pick and choose how deep and how far they want to go. And for some of our clients, it's sometimes just enough to be able to actually be in sovereignty and control of the body. And that's what I loved about this story. We can often have the big kind of jazz hand stories with these massive transformations, but for this client, that was enough. And that's what I love about this novel. And that's what I'm hoping to bring more of to you as we get into the summer. I see on the inside.